So when you walk down the street, the decisions that have been made before you in terms of the shaping of the built environment, they really shape your experience at an unconscious level. When we look around anywhere as a human, we are looking for essentially two dots for an eye, a line for a nose, and another line for a mouth. It's called the figural primitive. And it's like that template is burned into our mind before we're even born.
What is one insight from your recent research to improve mood, focus, or well-being?
Human body and brain does not like.
By the end of this episode, you'll understand the science-backed research, why certain spaces calm you instantly, why others drain you, and what's actually stressing you out without you realizing it. I'm sitting down with Professor Justin Hollander from Tufts University, who's done some of the coolest research on how our brains respond to buildings, streets, materials, and even blank walls, mostly at an unconscious level. You'll learn why your nervous system reacts to spaces before you do, why modern design is quietly increasing anxiety and disconnection, and how small design choices shape focus, comfort, and emotional safety. Let's get into it. Professor Hollander, it is absolute honor having you on the podcast. I'm so excited to get to ask you my questions because I have read your studies and I'm just fascinated by them. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, it's wonderful to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Happy to have you. Professor Hollander is Professor of Urban and Environmental Policy and Planning at Tufts University, and he has written many books and dozens of peer-reviewed articles on how places change over time and how that change affects people. For listeners who may be new to your work, how do you describe what you study and why the relationship between the built environment and human behavior has become the center of your career?
Yeah, so when you walk down the street, you go visit a friend, you go to a restaurant, the decisions that have been made before you in terms of the shaping of the built environment, whether it's how wide that sidewalk is, what kind of materials were used to build the building, what architectural style was implied, all those decisions are important and they really shape your experience. Amazingly, most of the way they shape your experience is at an unconscious level. We're not even aware of how we're being impacted. And so this is an area that I've been interested in a long time. And in the last, I would say about 15 years, I've been increasingly impressed by how much in the sciences they've begun to really understand how those different visual cues as well as cues that come in through our other senses impact us. And so my background is in urban planning. And so that's something I've always been really passionate about. So this research that I've been doing and just learning about it has been really for the purpose of trying to create better places for people.
Wow, that's incredible. First of all, thank you for what you do, because we all appreciate it, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. Was there a moment that you decided or you realized this is what you wanted to do?
Well, when I was a grad student doing my master's in urban planning, I was really drawn to the design side of the program that I was in. And they actually had studio environments where you could study landscape architecture. And I came from a political science background. So this was really fun. Like I got markers and colored pencils and, we made models. It was just something so different from what I was used to. If you can appreciate like a political science training, like that's like you mainly just read and write and maybe some statistics, that kind of stuff. So I was excited about what that environment offered for me as a student. But it actually became frustrating for me because I was making so many decisions as a designer, shaping places, we did parks and we did plazas, we did neighborhoods, and all these decisions I would ask, well, like, how do I do it? And the teachers would say, oh, well, no, it's a process that, it takes time, and you'll go through, and all of a sudden you'll get like an inspiration in the middle of the night, like this, because people did spend all night working on these designs. And so that always was something that bothered me. I was really, I just didn't buy that mentality that there's no like objectively perfect design that would fit with what we need. But I went on and I ended up not really pursuing the design stuff and stayed in the planning, and had this, great career as an urban planner, and then went back into academia. And then I met Anne Sussman, and she was working as an architect at that time, and she was dating someone in my department. So many years after they were dating, I got in touch with her about a potential collaboration. And she had come from a history of science background. That's what she had studied in college, and then had studied architecture. And she was equally frustrated. And so we started to collaborate and work together, and started to understand that there actually are some real well-known within, particularly in cognitive science, psychology, neuroscience, rules about how we should shape our built environment, the places that we live in. And they didn't teach that to me when I was in my design studies. And Anne was equally frustrated because they didn't teach that to her either.
And was there a time where you specifically walked into a space and realized that space isn't neutral? Were you frustrated by something in your environment?
Yeah, well, that is going to go back a little bit further. I think as a younger person, when I would spend time in environments that were very kind of automobile oriented, places that were not really welcoming to pedestrians. I grew up in a kind of a suburban context, and these are not places that were designed for me as a human, and I knew that intuitively. I knew that. So I think part of what drove me to want to be involved in urban planning at all was really that feeling of being rejected by the place I was in.
By your surroundings. We don't think about that. The world is built for people, but sometimes we forget that we have to, we're the people in it, or the people engaging in it. And we sometimes build it for not humans. We build it for cars or trucks, but not for us. So speaking of Dr. Anne Sussman, in your book, Together, Cognitive Architecture, Designing for How We Respond to the Built Environment, you argue that people don't experience space abstractly. They experience it through perception, attention, and emotion. What's one insight from the book that most changed how you personally look at everyday environments?
Yeah, the book, to just back up just a bit, was really started off by Anne and I, and with the help of our research assistants at Tufts, really just trying to cull through that literature. I've alluded to this earlier, that there is just so much great science that has been done to understand how we perceive our environment, how we experience places. And so many ways, the beginning of that book was really just an effort to just translate that science so that designers and planners could understand it. So yeah, so there's a lot. Can I pick one? I'll start with one.
We'll get into it. You can start with one.
So yeah, there's like this interesting idea that has a lot of credibility in the scientific community, that when we look around, and I'm not talking about just at a building, when we look around anywhere as a human, we are looking for essentially two dots for an eye, a line for a nose, and another line for a mouth. It's called the figural primitive. And it's like that template is burned into our mind before we're even born. And so this neuroscientist Eric Kandel wrote about how when we're born, we're looking for that. And frankly, that's our mother. We're looking for that two dots for the eye, the line for the nose, the line for the mouth. And then when we see it, that gives us comfort. That means that we found our mother and we can be safe. So we're always looking for that, not just as babies. And so when you look at a lot of traditional architecture, you see that. You see that same figural primitive Anne likes to call it face texture. Like the idea that faces are in a lot of designs. I believe you do work with tiles. I see it all the time in tiles too. Tiles that are designed to have that kind of face-like orientation. It makes us feel comfortable when you see it. And so that's pretty powerful.
Wow. Well, that explains so much why I'm seeing faces every time I look out at trash cans or the street or buildings. But actually, with tiles, one of the collections that I got to design for Lily Tile was the canine or the dog faces on tiles. And for some reason, let me tell you, people love it. And I don't know if it's seeing their dog look back at them or just the fact that it's a dog or the face, because that's the first time we put faces on tiles. But now I know the research backs it up. Very cool. Taking a step back from the science of how we respond on a larger scale, your work on shrinking cities has a really strong psychological dimension, cities as a whole, not just individual humans. What emotional or behavioral patterns emerge when a place is losing population, and how does it change human behavior?
Yeah, so this is a big problem that we face as humans in any kind of situation of loss. We are really it's not just like a kind of a psychological or emotional, it's a social thing that as humans, we want to be part of things that are growing, that are thriving. And so what a lot of the research that I've done over the years has been looking at places that are losing population, losing jobs. This is something that's hard for people to grapple with. And for the most part, they reject it. They say, well, we're going to stop it. We're going to reverse it. We're going to turn things around. Even if the economy suggests that that's not realistic, they're still going to try to do that. And so that's like a hard thing for people to grapple with. And I've had some good experiences with studying a couple places where they've done this well. And I'll point out to Youngstown, Ohio. Mm-hmm. They went through this really interesting planning process, community engagement, really trying to rethink what is like happening in the community. In the 1970s, they had a lot of plant closures, mainly tire plants, and the population just kept falling and falling. And during this planning process, people were like, you know what? I don't think we're going to grow again, and let's just figure out how to make it work. So they started to plan for decline, and so that I think is a healthy way to kind of manage this kind of change.
What do you mean plan for decline? Did they just accept that people are going to leave, it's going to shrink?
Yeah, and to think about how can they adjust the physical form of their communities to reflect that there aren't as many people there. I mean, think about it like a rural area, very low population, and then it grows and becomes more suburban. So why can't you go the other direction? Why can't a city go down to be more suburban? Or even in some parts, maybe even more rural. I actually traveled as part of a research project I did in Flint, Michigan. And that's a place that's experienced quite a lot of population decline. And I was so impressed on how you go through some neighborhoods, they feel rural, but like not in a bad way. They've experienced a lot of decline, a lot of disinvestment. But like a guy I met, he grows hops in his backyard. He's got all these dogs. The dogs are all like running around, leaping here and there. And so, yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. And that urban planners and designers can help. If a community decides that this is what they want to do, kind of help them adjust and make their communities feel more comfortable at a lower density. That's all.
Is there an example of this happening somewhere where it was shrinking and then city officials did something to turn it around and it successfully brought people back?
Well, that's the thing. You're saying the measure of success is to bring them back. If you are okay with that not being the measure, then yeah, there are quite a few places. Detroit, that they've had some success with this. I did a whole book about New Bedford, Massachusetts, which was one of the settings of Moby Dick. So kind of a famous historic city, not too far from where I am in Boston. And yeah, they've done a great job of managing. Is it booming? No. I mean, I call New Bedford, it's an ordinary city. It's not, has not like taken off, But you talk to people who live there, and most of them are very happy. They're very happy in a place that has essentially managed that change in a healthy way.
And on the flip side, are there cities where they grew too quickly and they just have not been able to adjust to making it comfortable for the growth?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, this is a perennial problem. And what we often see is connected to what we were discussing earlier, which is if a place is growing and it's not managed well, it's not planned for, what ends up happening is a lot of very automobile-oriented growth in the periphery. And it just spreads, this kind of urban sprawl effect. And that ends up contributing to a lot of problems. There could be environmental problems, air pollution problems. There could be problems related to fiscal stability as the place spreads out. What about the local governments that are in that core? Are they going to struggle with being able to bring enough tax revenue? Who's building the schools for all the new families and the kids who are moving out on the periphery? And it's almost always, what I've seen at least, is that sprawling pattern of growth is automobile oriented and tends to be a lot of big box stores. These are places that psychologically for humans these are not the kind of places that we thrive in, and frankly are wasteful because they're not the kind of environments that will last. They'll be recycled and reused or destroyed and thrown in the landfill at some point. So that's also really sad.
Well, speaking of that, in your research, what design choices or urban planning assumptions consistently produce negative results? And on the flip side, which ones consistently produce positive results?
Yeah. So one of the things that's relevant here is this idea of how do we create places that endure? So if a place endures, it will be more sustainable from an environmental standpoint. You won't have to kind of keep rebuilding and throwing it away. But if it endures, it's also going to be places that people want to be at, which will suggest that there's qualities about it that are good for them and makes them happy and makes them enjoy being there. So this great story that my colleague, co-author Ann Sussman likes to tell, that this secondary school that she went to, there was an older building on campus, and historic building. It looked like a face. It had all the bilateral symmetry and all the architectural elements, and it was a beautiful building. The administration had decided they were going to demolish the building and build a new kind of modern style structure. Well, the alums all got excited about it, and they were like, that's not happening, not on our watch. And they raised the money to save the building. So it endured. That building endured. That investment that was made was probably over 100 years ago, continued. So we want to be able to make design places that are going to have that kind of energy behind them, that people are going to be like, I want to save it. I want to invest in it. I want to repair the roof. I want to make improvements to that building. And that is the kind of place that will be good for people in years to come.
Do cities in Europe that are much older and have more historical value, do they kind of connect? And do the faces on those buildings, being the sculptures, do they have anything to do with it, or is that purely coincidence?
I don't think it's a coincidence. I don't think so. And I think we can definitely look to a lot of European cities as a model for the kind of designs that endure and that people connect to and that they remember and they want to go back to. I like this story about Huawei, which is a giant Chinese electronics company. They built a new campus in Shenzhen, I think, in China. So this is worth looking up. Look at this website. Read about this new campus. It looks like a European village. They could have built a giant spaceship, like when Apple built their headquarters, maybe like an orb or something, or in Seattle, Amazon has this kind of ridiculous looking futuristic building. No, they didn't do that. They were very smart because they built basically a replication of the kind of urban design that has endured for, in some cases, 1,000 years. That's what they built. And they have that future in mind as a company. They expect to be around that long.
That's fascinating. And actually, that kind of ties in. I had a conversation with a guest that we had on the podcast, Miriam Carpenter. She works with wood. And she was saying that things that are created by humans inherently have more value. And when you see the door that's crafted by a human or an artist, it has more value to us as humans. And then we almost feel bad destroying it or tearing it down.
Right. And, actually, I read something so fascinating on that same point, that there's something that happens at a psychological level when you see something, anything really, but that you try to imagine in your mind at an unconscious level how you would make it. So if it was made by a machine, that's very hard. And I don't know if the brain just kind of shuts down and it's just like, there's no way. But if it was made by a craftsperson, or at least made by a machine that makes it look like it was made by a craftsperson, you look at it and you're like, wow, that's okay. What kind of equipment would I use? And that the idea that you would do that on an unconscious level means you're connecting. And this is why ornamentation is so important. Whether it's tiles or in any kind of other building design, or in cities, you want that decoration, you want that ornament. So people, like you said, care about what they're seeing.
Yeah, that's kind of the reason why we do what we do at Lily Tile is we know that our tiles look very different than everything else on the market, but it allows people to express their personalities in their homes. And in turn, they feel more excited to come home and they're happier at 7 a.m. when they turn on the lights in their bathroom and their bright pink tiles or sparkly, tile. So that's very interesting that the research does back it up. This is just something we've been doing, and it's nice to know that we're headed in the right direction. Building on your facade research, which you sent to me, we mainly work with interior tiles. I mean, our tiles go outdoor as well, but building on your facade research, how much do surface level design decisions like material, texture, repetition, rhythm, how much do they matter compared to larger planning moves when it comes to how stressed or calm people feel?
Yeah. So my colleague, Dr. Maria Christofi, she's at the University of Houston, and I did this project and I just published it pretty recently. So I'd encourage you to kind of read it, or have your listeners read it. What we did was we looked at a range of different material types and across different dimensions around how rough or hard it was, how natural or bright it was, and how solid or perforated it was. And it's not like I can say, oh, everyone should just buy solid materials. It's not like that, but it's more just that we were able to show in this research using largely eye tracking and facial expression analysis that it matters, that there is a significant difference in how people see each of these different types of materials. And we were focusing on it from a facade perspective, and looking at different building facades. Though I think that across the design disciplines, this type of, these kinds of findings are equally valid. But yeah, I mean, what we were able to see is that people actually, when they look at the different facades across these dimensions, they experience them differently, and they had different types of facial expressions, like happy or sad or angry, and that they kind of fixated on different parts. Their eyes kind of went to different parts. And so I gave a talk about some of this research at the Yale School of Architecture, which, it's very much in the kind of fine arts tradition, that school. And I had a kind of few angry listeners, and they were like, you can't just input a design into a computer and tell it. No, you can't. That's true. So there's still an important role for the designer, but the designer needs to pay attention to this stuff too, is kind of what we're trying to show in this research and in others.
Do you feel like in current designs, designers just don't take any of this into consideration?
Yeah. So when I started doing this research, basically nobody did. But I'm starting to see the emergence of a community of practitioners who are really taking this stuff seriously and incorporating it into their work. And, I think that's promising, but for the most part, no, that's really just not happening. And so we're trying to evangelize here and try to get people to change.
Yeah, it almost feels like sometimes the cooler things that are coming out, it's like shiny object syndrome, right? We want this, now we want this, now we want this. But when we take a step back, we realize that maybe those crazy textures and patterns on our wall at home are not doing us very well, are not doing us good and internally. But it almost seems like now people are slowly starting to notice, but doesn't seem like it was the case, many years ago. From an environmental psychology perspective, what parallels do you see between the psychological impact of a city and the psychological impact of a home, if any? Do you see any parallels?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's huge parallels, and so just because of my training, most of my work has really been in that kind of public realm and that kind of city scale. I actually have this really fun project I'm working on with a museum north of Boston, the Peabody Essex Museum, and so here everything we're doing is interior, and we're working with, they have a neuroscientist on staff, which is pretty extraordinary for an art museum. But they're very, very concerned about the experience of people inside the museum. And so we're working with them to do some of the same kind of biometrics and other types of analysis. But we are also going to be partnering with them on the exterior, because this is a museum that has maybe about a dozen or so historic buildings in the neighborhood. So you're kind of asking about, like, how do those two scales kind of operate, and we're in this study, at least we're trying to look at that very question, and I think it's valid that when you are walking around in a public park or something, that's different than walking around in your living room, but your brain doesn't really know that, so. One of the things we often talk about in environmental psychology is the idea of a primal vista. So that has to do with, like, being able to look, like, really far out and be able to kind of see the distant objects, and to be able to recognize that you are in a state of security, and that you can see far potential predators or whatnot. But that's also true in your home. And, if it's not like within your own space that you're in, it's about looking out a window and to be able to kind of see far enough to be able to kind of feel comfortable.
Interesting. That makes us feel safer, being able to see out. So, like higher buildings where we can see the whole view, do they make us feel safer?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually not sure I know the answer to that question. I think that being very high introduces a lot of other variables. Like vertigo related variables. But at least certainly, like medium height, I think that's something that the evidence is pretty clear that it gives us positionality over potential danger that people really like.
I'm curious if any of that ties to like historical wars and when they would have like posts in the Roman Empire, overlooking to see if there are any attackers, or during the Ottoman period. I'm curious if that ties to it. And kind of going back to your work on the with the museum and the exterior facade, I spent a long time living and working in Philadelphia. I went to school there, and Philadelphia is a beautiful city. If you've been, it has a lot of historical charm, but seeing a lot of the new buildings popping up, it's almost jarring seeing these gorgeous, 500-year-old buildings, and then right next to it a modern like cube. And what does that do to us? Does it? Besides just annoy us, really, but.
Yeah, no, I think it's really bad. And, when you are working at that eye level, someone walking on the street, it is possible that these architects can activate that facade right at the eye level. But most of them don't. They choose not to. Are you familiar with the work of Jan Gehl? It's a Danish architect. He's written this book called Cities for People. And he talks about, because he's like very savvy businessman, and he has this big practice. And he's like, you know what? You need to build a giant cube, build it. But just pay attention to that first one or two stories. And make it feel like it's a 500-year-old building at that first, because that's just how people operate. You don't generally look up. People don't generally look up. So, if you can just capture that experience of just being in that space at eye level, you need to build a giant skyscraper made of glass and steel, that's his opinion. Do it, fine. It's okay. And so I agree. I think that makes sense. But, you can still pay attention to that public realm, that eye level experience.
Yeah, it almost feels like in our human nature, we appreciate things that are well made. And now we're seeing when things are very factory, off the production line, we almost appreciate it less.
Right.
Perhaps there's a parallel with us appreciating a building less because it doesn't really do it for us. It doesn't have a face, doesn't feel thoughtfully curated.
No ornamentation.
No ornamentation. Who knew it was this important for us as humans? But we do it all the time, right? Every holiday season, there's ornaments, there's decoration, and they say it's the best time of the year because everyone is excited, and there's ornaments, there's beauty. There's got to be a correlation.
And then everyone takes it down.
Take it all out. So, okay, how much responsibility do you feel the built environment accounts for or bears for today's loneliness crisis, if any?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's so many factors. I wouldn't want to go out on a limb and say definitively, but there's no question that the way that we shape our homes and the growing size of a typical housing unit makes it so that people are less likely to spend time in public spaces. I had the opportunity last year to travel to Uganda, and I'd never been to Africa before, and I was really surprised to see how much people spend time in the evening in their free time out and about in public spaces. People essentially are pouring out of their homes and interacting with each other and socializing and singing and dancing and eating together. And I came back home, and it's just like everyone just shuts themselves out into their apartments or their homes, and so that's a pretty big difference. So we can shape our environments differently, but culturally, I think there's also something wrong with us that are making us so antisocial.
But do you think that's done on purpose? Because I've seen and read a lot of things about the third space in Europe, very, very commonly, the plazas, the piazzas, places you just gather without having to ask permission. Whereas in the US, it's very much home, work, or somewhere like a restaurant. Tell me more about that if you have any experience with that.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of research, and my own work, I've seen that tremendously, that it's so important for in an urban planning context to make space for those third spaces. And they can be public parks, they could be markets, they could be like a plaza. There's a lot of ways that can be designed. What I was talking about in Uganda and the cities they're just very wide sidewalks, just the ability to be able to have space. And during COVID, that was like a big thing. A lot of restaurants started pouring out into the sidewalk and taking over parking spaces. So that's I think a lot of that's pulled back. The old ways are setting back in. But
do you think that's done on purpose in the U.S. because the U.S. Focuses more on the individual?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think that in some ways the home building industry is partially responsible because they really market the home as a sanctuary, the idea of a family room. That we want to spend all of our time inside with our immediate family. I mean, that is really kind of antagonistic to the idea of the third spaces. I mean, I don't want to say that that's wrong, but I'm just saying that that's kind of how we got where we are today, I think.
Right. It's like there's more focus on the individual or the home unit rather than the community as a whole.
I read this great book called Trespassers, and it's by a scholar at the University of Maryland. Her name is Willow Lung Amam, and she was studying this community in Silicon Valley, where it was a community that had evolved in the 1950s, very kind of mid-century, low-slung, low-density housing, and these Asian immigrants, mainly folks who were working in Silicon Valley at the big tech firms, were moving in and demolishing those homes and building very large 3+ story, what were were called McMansions or monster homes, pejoratively, but the discussion that she wrote about in this book was in the public realm was like, these new buildings are for the people, and they don't spend time outside anymore, and that their experience is all like, they essentially have like a wall around their lives, and that as a result of that debate, the city council basically made it illegal to build these tear downs and to build the monster homes. But the author was really good, really sensitive about how that's really unfair. I mean, if that's their choice, if that's something they want to do, they should be allowed to. But
that's actually pretty sad, because I through a lot of our tiles are made in Vietnam, so I got the opportunity to go, and some of the happiest people I've ever met. They're living multiple generations in a home, and not a very big one at all. And here you see in America these giant homes with a few people living inside, and they're not even a fraction of as happy as the people in Vietnam. So it's fascinating to me. It really is.
Yeah, and that's you're right about the multi-generational. That was a big part of the people who wanted to have these large homes so they can accommodate all the multiple generation. But the existing residents were saying, "Oh no, but we want you to have a big lawn so you can be outside and then we can see you while we're walking by and wave." Just like
a whole other rabbit hole. But I actually read that it helps the older generation, like the grandparents, to be close to the grandkids, because it helps them. It keeps them young and helps the parents, take some pressure off. So they were doing something right. So what's one big misunderstanding the general public has about how cities or environments shape their psychological experience?
There's a lot of misunderstandings. I think the biggest probably would be that most people don't realize how much is happening autotomically, like on its own. That, I mean, we all know that like our heart is beating on its own, right? We understand that. We understand that we're not consciously deciding that. But people don't really just like get this idea that if you walk around, you go outside, you go to approach the restaurant across nearby, like that you're also responding in all of those same ways without realizing it. You're either getting stressed out, you're getting worried, you're getting happy, whatever it is, and you're not controlling it. So that's one thing I'd like people to take away.
That is a big one. And I just want to go back real quick to your study on facades. Is it correct that regardless of if it's natural or man-made materials, the lighter ones tend to have a better influence in color rather than the darker ones on us?
Yeah, I mean, that was something that we found. And it's pretty consistent with other research that I've done, and just other like studies I've read, that kind of lighter, it's just kind of like more upbeat. You've heard of seasonal affective disorder. It's kind of the same idea that people tend to want to be around things that are light. So keep that in mind, but it's not gonna like constrain any designers. Sometimes dark makes sense.
No, I mean, I read that actually part of the reason why like Swedish decor is Finland, Denmark, all that very light woods, light colors, because they have so many hours of darkness in the winter, and that really helps keep them happy, and they spend a lot of time at home.
Yeah.
Rather than sometimes in the US, we go wild with our wall colors and our furniture colors. For someone listening who wants to improve their environment, whether it's the interior or the exterior, perhaps they're selecting a facade for their new home, what is one principle from environmental psychology or one insight from your recent research that they can apply immediately to improve mood, focus, or well-being, or all three?
Yeah, well, so one of the things that has come up over and over again in my own research, my own reading, on other people's work, is that the human body and brain does not like blank walls. I'm looking behind you, and you have these, two lovely paintings. But yeah, I mean, what we don't like is when it's just blank. When there's no ornamentation, there's no decoration, there's no complication. So when a person is thinking about making some improvements or modifying their own home environment, just kind of look around. Like, are there a lot of like blank walls? And if so, that might be bad for you. That might be kind of bringing you down. So think about ways to decorate, or even it could just be like painting with some, whether it's lines or some patterns or wallpaper. Do people still do wallpaper? I don't know.
Yeah, they still do wallpaper.
So that's another way to do it.
Is there a tipping point? Because I once stayed in an Airbnb that had frames on every square inch of the wall, and I was so anxious. I just was stressed in that space. So is there kind of like a where it's too much, maybe?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no question. So when I talk about this idea of a blank facade or blank wall or something, we are in three-dimensional space and we're always moving around and whatnot. So, I mean, think about it like that. Like if it's at like a dining room table and you're sitting there, you're not moving, you're still, and most of your field of view is just blank wall, I would say that's a problem. But if it's just like, different, maybe like a hallway or something as you're going from one place to another, that there's some blank space, it kind of gives you like a little bit of a breath, maybe a little relaxation between the next object. I think that's fine. But a trained designer who has read my book, Cognitive Architecture, I mean, that would be a person that, could kind of help, I think, make that decision about where exactly you want that.
Sure.
Make that compromise.
And do faces and art do we respond differently to faces and art as we do to faces and other things, such as buildings?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
So, to be kind of aware of that, not to necessarily say everyone's home needs to be a portrait gallery.
Does it matter though, I'm like fascinated by this face concept. Does it matter if the face is smiling or frowning? Does that make a difference or not really?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does make a difference. Yeah. But we are very complicated. I really emphasize the unconscious and all that, but we also are conscious. I mean, I'm talking to you. I'm not talking to you unconsciously. So we do experience the world around us consciously as well. And so if you see a face that's frowning at you, whether that impacts you emotionally or not, it's still you're still going to be aware of it, and you might not like that. So
You might think the building across the street is angry at you every day when you look at it. If you could imagine the future of cities 20 to 30 years from now, what innovations or shifts do you hope will embrace to create environments that truly, truly support human flourishing?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been really frustrated with for a long time as an urban planner is that the response to kind of growing places, if you will, the mantra has been, what we need to do is we need to focus new development in existing urban areas and restrict the spreading and growth of development in new areas. And that's been the mantra. And I bought into that. That sounds like, well, yeah, sure. We should do that. Sounds really good. And as an urban planner, we learned about all the ways that you can do both of those things. How you can conserve land in the periphery and how you can encourage new development. But I have been doing this now for a long time, and I have come to recognize that mantra is fatally flawed. It just, at least in our capitalist democracy, it doesn't work. And that's what I've seen with my own eyes, which is that the investment in the existing urban areas is good, but it's very modest. And and the sprawl, that kind of growth continues to happen at just such a high clip. So it doesn't even work. So the answer, I think, is kind of an older idea, which is new towns. And so if we can be building new towns from scratch in areas that otherwise would just be built up with conventional automobile-oriented subdivisions, if we can build new towns which are walkable, pedestrian-oriented, bikeable, transit-supportive, mixed use, with the kind of third spaces we're talking about, then I think that's the answer. And a lot of people agree with me, but the answer, people have always said, well, but like, how do you do it? You can't do it. It's too hard. In the 1970s, the federal government got in the business of building new towns. They built about 5 or 6 or 7, and that didn't work out. So how do you do it? So the answer is zoning. So I've been working with this group of people. We did a big conference a few months ago. And yeah, the answer is we can really rethink about how zoning works to be able to encourage this kind of development that creates the places that we've been talking about for the last hour. But you do it through a zoning mechanism that will give the real estate developers autonomy to be able to create great places.
When the US did create this in the 70s, why did it fail? What happened?
Yeah, so there's a few reasons. One is that they were still kind of caught up in a kind of a modernist design philosophy. So one famous one is Columbia, Maryland, and that's halfway between Baltimore and Washington. Have you been?
No, I haven't.
So instead of building a downtown, they built a shopping mall, which is surrounded by just like a sea of parking.
Interesting.
And like, it's really easy to drive around. There are these big, wide roads that go from one place to the other, but it's not safe to bike, and you wouldn't want to walk. It's too far from one place to the other to walk. So the sense of scale and everything was just totally fundamentally flawed. And I think that, my personal bias is that the federal government's really not that well suited to be designing places. Again, that's where my idea that this conference I led, it's really about how can we empower real estate developers working with architects and planners, designers, let them make the right decisions. It's really not really, government bureaucrats aren't really so well suited to some of these sensitive choices.
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like in the US, everything is so large, which sometimes we think bigger is better. But you go to these European cities and everything is so small, just a few minutes away. And we almost want less because you can walk, you can bike, it's very accessible. Whereas here you have everything, but it's just so far away. I sometimes get exhausted walking from one end of the to the other of Costco, and it's all in the same store. So
yeah, well, that's great. I read something recently. My mother sent me, so I'll give her credit. So the 20-minute city, the idea that within a 20-minute walk, you can get all of your needs. Well, some scientists did this study looking at how much that had a relationship with people's brain health. So there's a lot of research on Alzheimer's, and so much of that research has focused on like biochemical processes in the brain. Well, these people, they decided to do something different. They said, well, where do these people live? And it turned out that the people who lived in these 20-minute cities had much better brain health than other people. It's better for you. It will give you a better memory if you're in a place that's walkable.
yeah, you look at the blue zones also, and many of them are tiny little, like a little island in Greece where everybody knows one another and within walking distance. So hopefully we're going that direction, like the pendulum is swinging the other direction.
I hope so.
So this show is about spaces, right? Interior, exterior. I want to ask, is there a space in your life, past or present, that has genuinely changed you, and why?
Well, I'm really glad you asked this because I did this research project a couple of years back on my hometown. So I grew up in Connecticut, in a town that's on the water called Westport, and I was kind of curious about the same thing. So I traveled. I haven't lived there in a long time, but I decided I'd go back, and I traveled all over the town. My dad drove me around, and I took pictures of all of like the places I remember spending time in, like my elementary school, the beach, Main Street, all that. And then I did eye tracking on those pictures to see like what are the things that kind of draw me in. And I did find that a lot of those places had very strong elements, whether they were kind of visual, like or colors or shapes. that really drew my attention. And I don't know, it seems to make sense. So I wrote it up, and I'm hoping it gets published in this book that's coming out soon. But I'll share it with you if it comes out. But yeah, I think that really, there is a tie between like what are in these. I mean, in this case, it's a picture, but like in the field of vision of where in a place you're at, and what do you remember? What do you think about?
Professor Hollander, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. You are a wealth of knowledge, and I could talk to you for 3 hours. Thank you for all of the insights. We will link your book, your research in the show notes for our listeners, but I truly value your time, and thank you so much for joining us on the show. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah, well, thank you for the invitation, and I very much enjoyed talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for spending this time with me on Room to Think. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to follow the show, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who you think would really appreciate a more thoughtful approach to their space. You can find more Design Meets Psychology insights on social, in our community, and definitely in upcoming episodes so you can build a better life by design. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.